The Haggadah famously teaches us about 4 different types of children: the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not yet know how to ask. But had I been there in the Beit Midrash, the house, the study hall of the rabbis who composed this pedagogical text of texts, I would have encouraged the sages to consider a 5th category of learner, one that captures the essence of who I was as a young student, and perhaps every so often as an adult as well: the impatient child. Not bored, not disinterested, not unengaged, but impatient. As in, enough with the questions, let's just get to the answer. As in, how many minutes, how many steps until we get to the end of the lesson or the chapter? As in, when will this be over? Like many children, I sat at the Seder table or in shul counting the pages until we got to eat, or until Aleinu, which on Shabbat at least was mercifully the same number. But for me, it was more than just the typical childhood shpilkus. As a student of arithmetic, of simple pluses and minuses, I was average. But when the digits doubled in size, when the ones had to be carried and the rows of numbers in a problem grew longer and longer, my mind began to unravel. I began to skip steps, to take shortcuts, and unsurprisingly, to make mistakes. Why was I so impatient? It's not that I didn't want to get the right answer, it's just that I wanted the right answer right now. I wanted to know as quickly as possible that I was capable of arriving at the correct solution. I wanted immediate validation. I wanted certainty without the inconvenience and the burden of the effort. Parents, teachers, rabbis tried to slow me down, tried to encourage me to enjoy the complexity, the puzzle of the question, as much as the satisfaction and the simplicity of the answer. And for a time, that might have worked. But it wasn't long before that gnawing, churning, sometimes incapacitating desire burned within me to answer the most pressing question of them all: when will this be over? The Torah reading for Chol Hamoed Pesach picks up after the spectacular failure of the golden calf, as I mentioned, a sin committed by the newly freed Israelites who were, without a doubt, guilty of impatience. For 40 nights and 40 days, they waited for their Redeemer to return to the camp from his summit with God. But after 400 years of slavery, when he tarried on the mountaintop with a divine presence shrouded in the mystery of thunder and lightning, they grew tired of waiting. That they turned to a gleaming idol of material wealth, in essence and purpose the same master who used and abused them in Egypt, was quite a shock to Moses. How could they have reverted so quickly to the base desires indoctrinated into them by their captors in Egypt? Why were they in such a hurry to construct a God that they could measure in expense and in size, one whose shortcomings were as obvious as the destructive path it would eventually lead them down, a path that privileged the physical over the spiritual, the supreme over the sublime, and the powerful over the powerless? Why? Because they were afraid of the time that was ticking as their questions were left unanswered. Would Moses return? Had he abandoned them? Because they were undisciplined, too immature to have faith in a God that rescued them with loud and powerful signs and wonders, but whose commandments now required them to relocate that responsibility for the power into a force more human than divine in themselves. Because they were impatient. Too invested in the security and the certainty of the future promised to their ancestors, and not invested enough in developing the tools necessary to ensure that this future would not last just for one generation, but for every generation. Yes, Moses was surprised to see the glint of gold in the distance as he came down from Sinai, surprised that the children of Israel were acting like children. But the greatest surprise is not that the Israelites lacked the patience for a God they could hear but could not see, but that Moses was guilty of the same impatience. Maimonides wrote that of all the women and men granted the extraordinary ability to hear God's voice, none was greater than Moses. That if prophecy was a mirror, a surface that displayed a reflection of the divine will, the mirror that Moses gazed into was the most unobscured of all, what he called ha'aspaklaria ha'me'ira, the illuminated glass. And yet, as we just read, even for Moses, that wasn't enough. After a plague decimated his people as punishment for the sin of the golden calf, Moses ascends Mount Sinai once more to plead with God. You say to me, Moses demands, lead this people forward, but you have not made known to me whom you will send with me. It is, of course, obvious at this point in the narrative that God is to be Moses' companion, the shepherd's shepherd, as they travel together with the Israelites to the promised land. So if Moses knows that it will be God who goes before the people, what can he possibly be asking of God when he claims that he does not know who will go with him on what will become a long and perilous journey? A few short verses later, Moses clarifies both the question and the intention behind it. Hareini na et kivodecha. Oh, let me behold your presence. Even Moses, who saw God more clearly and more intimately than any other human being in history, could not stand the suspense. He wanted to see more, he wanted to see it all, and he wanted to see it now. Surely Moses knew that as his relationship with God grew and matured and deepened in time, the picture through the glass would sharpen and the hazy fog of God's form would come into focus. But at this perilous moment, with the remnants of contagion and death still hovering above the camp, Moses' deepest fears and anxieties had worn away some of his faith, some of his certainty in God's protection, some of his patience. And though God met the people's broken faith with punishment and plague, his response to Moses, perhaps because of Moses' good intentions, perhaps because God had seen the terrible consequences of the unchecked power of pandemic amongst his people, his response to Moses is altogether different. Enough death, God responds, for no man may see me and live. But I will make all of my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name of Adonai, and the grace that I grant, and the compassion that I will show. No, Moses, I will not reward your impatience with knowledge or wisdom that you cannot possibly withstand. But I can tell you that the closest that you will ever come to seeing my face is to see me at my most compassionate, to allow my presence to pass by you as I shelter you in place near me, in the cleft of a rock, as I shield you with my hand until I have passed by. When will this be over? I don't know. But if Pesach teaches us anything, it teaches us the answer to a different question. How will this end? Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes in his commentary to the Haggadah, the Torah leaves no doubt whatsoever as to the lesson Israel was to learn from this formative experience of slavery and dehumanization in Egypt, stating it no less than 36 times. You shall love the stranger, because you know what it feels like to be a stranger. You shall protect and respect one who is different, for you more than any other people on earth know what it is to be different. This will end when our compassion becomes stronger than our impatience. It ends when we do something quite difficult, nearly impossible, really, at a time when we are more distant from each other than ever, when nearly every encounter is an encounter with an other who is after the same scarce product in the grocery store, an other who is applying for the same federal business loan or unemployment benefit, an other whose very breath might pose a real danger to our own ability to inhale and exhale. It will end when our compassion becomes stronger than our fear, when we are able to balance the concerns we have for our own health and our own wealth and our own well-being with those of the people we know and love and those of the people that we don't. It will end when we stop trying to forecast simply what we will have left in a month or 3 months or a year, and focus our energy and attention on who we will have kept through the practice of kindness and selflessness and sacrifice. It will end when through sheer determination, we have sheltered as many people in their place as possible, but who, through our acts of chesed and tzedek, loving kindness and justice, have seen the presence of God pass by as they wait patiently for their Redeemer, for their redemption to return. And now let's pray for God